Imagine walking into a computer store in 1995 and spending nearly $2,000 on a brand new personal computer. You carry the large boxes home, connect the monitor, keyboard, and speakers, press the power button, and watch Windows load for the very first time. Inside the box are manuals, recovery disks, and application CDs, maybe Microsoft Office, maybe Encarta, maybe a few games. But there is one thing you won't find: the Internet. Buying a computer didn't automatically mean you could go online. First, you needed a modem. Then you had to subscribe to an Internet Service Provider, or ISP. An ISP is a company that connects your computer to the Internet through a telephone line. After that came another decision. How would you actually explore this new online world? The answer was a browser. A browser is software that lets you open and navigate websites on the World Wide Web. People obtained browsers in different ways. Some arrived on CD-ROMs included with computer magazines. Others came inside installation kits from Internet providers. Some were copied from friends or colleagues. If you already had an Internet connection, you could also download one, although large downloads over dial-up were often slow and frustrating. At first, this didn't seem like an important market. A browser was simply another piece of software you installed after buying your computer. But as more businesses launched websites, more universities connected to the web, and millions of households signed up for Internet access, that simple piece of software quietly became something much bigger. Every journey onto the Internet now began in exactly the same place: the browser. Whoever built the browser people chose would influence how millions experienced the Internet every single day. Most technology companies hadn't yet realized what that meant. One startup had. Its name was Netscape. Within months, it would build the browser that introduced millions to the World Wide Web. And before Microsoft fully understood what was happening, the gateway to the Internet was already beginning to slip out of its hands. When the World Wide Web began expanding in the mid-1990s, people needed a browser that made exploring it simple. The problem was that early browsers were often slow, limited, and designed mainly for researchers and technical users, rather than ordinary families. That changed with a browser called Mosaic. Developed at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, or NCSA, Mosaic made the web far easier to use by displaying text and images together in the same window with a simple graphical interface. One of the engineers behind Mosaic was Mark Andreessen. He believed the Internet would soon move beyond universities and become part of everyday life. In 1994, Andreessen partnered with Silicon Graphics founder Jim Clark to create a new company called Netscape Communications. Their goal wasn't simply to build another browser, it was to build the browser for the Internet age. The result was Netscape Navigator. Navigator was faster than many competing browsers, easier to install, and updated more rapidly as the web evolved. Just as importantly, Netscape allowed individuals to use Navigator free of charge, removing one of the biggest barriers to adoption. As Internet providers signed up new customers, many included Netscape in their installation kits. Technology magazines distributed Navigator on cover CDs. Businesses copied it between office computers. Schools and universities installed it in computer labs. And for people who already had an Internet connection, Netscape could also be downloaded directly. Wherever new Internet users appeared, Netscape seemed to be there first. The company wasn't just building software, it was building familiarity. For millions of people, the very first website they ever visited was opened through Netscape Navigator. That growing popularity created an opportunity far bigger than browser sales. Netscape's real business was enterprise server software. Enterprise server software helps organizations run websites, manage online traffic, and deliver internet services. The more organizations building websites, the more potential customers Netscape had for those server products. The browser attracted users, the users attracted businesses, and the businesses generated the revenue. By 1995, Netscape had become the browser most people associated with the Internet itself. For Microsoft, that success was impossible to ignore. Not because Netscape had become larger than Windows, but because the company controlling the gateway to the web was no longer Microsoft. By 1995, Microsoft wasn't losing the personal computer market. Windows still powered the overwhelming majority of computers around the world. The company's operating system business remained incredibly strong. So why spend time worrying about a browser? The answer wasn't where the Internet was, it was where the Internet appeared to be heading. As more businesses moved online, websites became more sophisticated. Developers were no longer creating simple pages filled with text and images. They were beginning to build increasingly interactive software that ran through the browser. Microsoft saw the possibility that browsers could eventually become far more than tools for viewing websites. They could become a platform for running software. A software platform is the foundation developers build applications for. For years, Windows had been that platform. Software companies created programs specifically for Windows because that was where customers were. But if developers could one day build applications that worked inside a browser instead of depending on Windows, the operating system could gradually become less important. Another technology reinforced that concern: Java. Java is a programming language designed so that the same application could run on many different operating systems without being rewritten for each one. If browsers supported Java well enough, developers could write software once and allow it to run on Windows, Macintosh, and other systems alike. For Microsoft, that possibility represented a long-term strategic risk. The company wasn't worried that Netscape would replace Windows overnight. It was worried that Windows might slowly lose its position as the center of personal computing. That concern became impossible to ignore in May 1995. Bill Gates circulated a company-wide document that became known as the Internet Tidal Wave Memo. In it, he warned that the Internet was changing the technology industry more dramatically than any previous development. Microsoft needed to respond quickly. The company had already released Internet Explorer 1.0, but simply building another browser would not be enough. Microsoft needed a strategy that would stop Netscape from becoming the gateway to the future of computing. When Internet Explorer 1.0 launched in August 1995, Microsoft had finally entered the browser market. On paper, it looked like the company had everything it needed: the world's most widely used operating system, thousands of software developers, enormous financial resources, and now a browser of its own. But Internet Explorer didn't immediately change the market. Most people still had to make a conscious decision about which browser to use. Some installed Netscape Navigator from an ISP setup kit. Others found it on magazine cover CDs or copied it from friends and colleagues. Internet Explorer could also be installed, but it was simply another option. The competition was still being decided one customer at a time. And in that contest, Netscape continued to lead. Navigator had become familiar. Businesses recommended it.
Universities taught students to use it. Technology magazines praised it. Internet providers distributed it. Every new Internet user who chose Netscape made the browser even more valuable. Website developers tested their pages using Navigator. Companies trained employees to use it. Technical books explained Internet browsing through Netscape's interface. The browser was becoming the default choice, not because it came with every computer, but because people expected to find it. Microsoft realized something important. Building a better browser wasn't enough. Even matching Netscape's features wasn't enough. As long as customers were still being asked to choose, Netscape kept winning. The battle wasn't really about browser features anymore. It was about distribution. Whoever controlled how browsers reached customers would eventually control the gateway to the Internet. Microsoft had spent years building one of the most powerful distribution networks in the technology industry. Millions of new computers already left factories with Windows installed. Computer manufacturers depended on Microsoft. Software companies built around Windows. If Windows already reached almost every new computer, Microsoft began asking a simple question: why make customers install a browser when every Windows computer could already have one waiting for them the moment it was switched on? That single idea would completely change the browser wars. Microsoft's next move wasn't to ask customers to choose Internet Explorer. It was to make that choice increasingly unnecessary. The company began expanding how Internet Explorer reached new computers. Early versions appeared through Microsoft's Windows 95 Plus pack. Then computer manufacturers, known as OEMs, began shipping more new Windows computers with Internet Explorer already installed. An OEM, or Original Equipment Manufacturer, is a company that builds and sells computers using Microsoft's Windows operating system. For customers, the experience was changing. Just months earlier, getting online meant finding a browser, installing it, and deciding which one to use. Now, many people switched on a new computer and discovered a browser was already there. No searching, no installation, no extra step. That small change had enormous consequences. Most people use the software that's immediately available. If a browser was already installed and ready to open websites, many saw little reason to look for another one. Every customer who accepted the default was one fewer person downloading Netscape. The effect spread far beyond individual households. Businesses deploying hundreds of new computers no longer needed to install a browser on every machine. Schools and universities could prepare computer labs more quickly. Large organizations reduced the time needed to set up new computers. Convenience was becoming a competitive advantage. Netscape now faced a problem it couldn't easily solve. It could improve Navigator, it could release updates faster, it could introduce new features, but it couldn't place its browser on every new Windows computer before customers even sat down at the keyboard. Microsoft wasn't simply distributing software anymore. It was using control of the operating system to influence the starting point of every Internet journey. The battle had shifted. It was no longer about building the better browser. It was about controlling the first click. And with every new Windows computer leaving the factory, Microsoft's position became stronger.
Microsoft's distribution strategy didn't eliminate Netscape overnight. Navigator remained widely used for several years, but the balance was beginning to change. Every month, millions of new Windows computers entered homes, schools, and businesses with Internet Explorer already available. Each new computer reduced the number of people who needed to actively search for another browser.
That gradual shift started affecting everyone connected to the web. Website developers pay close attention to which browsers their visitors use. As Internet Explorer's user base grew, developers increasingly tested new websites to ensure they worked perfectly with Microsoft's browser. Some began designing websites specifically for Internet Explorer's features. Businesses noticed the same trend. When purchasing hundreds or even thousands of computers, using the browser already installed on Windows reduced deployment time, training requirements, and ongoing technical support. For many organizations, standardizing on Internet Explorer became the simplest business decision. Software companies also followed the market. Many web applications were now designed and optimized with Internet Explorer in mind, because that was where the largest and fastest growing audience was. Each decision reinforced the next. More users encouraged more developers. More developers attracted more businesses. More businesses brought even more users. Economists call this a network effect. A network effect occurs when a product becomes more valuable simply because more people are already using it. Netscape understood exactly what was happening. The company continued releasing new versions of Navigator, improving performance and introducing new capabilities. But better software could no longer solve the underlying problem. The distribution advantage belonged to Microsoft, and Netscape's broader business strategy was beginning to suffer. The browser had always been more than just a browser. It attracted customers to Netscape's enterprise server products, which generated much of the company's revenue. As browser market share weakened, so did Netscape's ability to influence the future direction of the web and strengthen its enterprise business. The battle was no longer being fought one download at a time. It was becoming a self-reinforcing system. The more Internet Explorer spread, the easier it became for Internet Explorer to spread even further. By the late 1990s, Microsoft was no longer simply competing in the browser market. It was steadily becoming the browser market. By the late 1990s, Microsoft's strategy appeared to be working. Internet Explorer's market share continued to rise. Netscape's position weakened, and Windows remained the operating system found on the vast majority of personal computers. From Microsoft's perspective, the company had simply improved Windows by including Internet capabilities that customers increasingly expected. But many competitors and regulators saw something very different. Microsoft didn't just sell Windows. It also controlled one of the most important distribution channels in the technology industry. Nearly every major computer manufacturer depended on Windows. Those manufacturers, known as OEMs, relied on Microsoft to license the operating system that customers expected on their new computers. Regulators began asking an important question. Was Microsoft competing fairly, or was it using its dominance in operating systems to eliminate competition in another market? That question eventually reached the United States Department of Justice, often called the DOJ. The DOJ is the U.S. government department responsible for enforcing federal laws, including competition laws, designed to prevent companies from abusing monopoly power. Together with a group of U.S. states, the DOJ accused Microsoft of illegally maintaining its monopoly by using Windows to protect and expand its position in the browser market. The case focused on more than just Internet Explorer. It examined Microsoft's agreements with computer manufacturers, restrictions affecting how Windows could be presented, and whether bundling Internet Explorer with Windows unfairly disadvantaged competing browsers. Inside the courtroom, two very different arguments emerged. Microsoft argued that Internet Explorer had become an integral part of Windows, and that integrating new features into its operating system represented normal product improvement. The government argued that Microsoft's actions went beyond innovation. According to regulators, Microsoft's control over Windows gave the company the ability to shape customer choice before competitors ever had a realistic opportunity to compete. After months of testimony, internal emails, technical evidence, and executive interviews, the court delivered a decision that shook the technology industry. The judge concluded that Microsoft had maintained a monopoly in the personal computer operating system market and had used that power in ways that violated U.S. antitrust law. For the first time, Microsoft's browser strategy was no longer being debated in boardrooms. It had become one of the most significant antitrust cases in modern business history. But even as Microsoft fought in court, Netscape was already running out of time.
By the time Microsoft's legal battle was dominating headlines, Netscape's position in the browser market had already been severely weakened. Winning in court and winning in business had become two very different things. Even if Microsoft faced legal restrictions, Netscape still had to convince millions of people to return to a browser they had gradually stopped using. That was becoming increasingly difficult. The browser market had changed. Businesses had standardized on Internet Explorer. Schools taught students using Internet Explorer. Many websites were designed primarily to work with Internet Explorer. For countless users, Internet Explorer had simply become the normal way to access the web. In November 1998, America Online, better known as AOL, announced it would acquire Netscape in a deal valued at approximately $4.2 billion. At first, the acquisition looked like a possible lifeline. AOL was one of the world's largest internet companies, serving millions of dial-up subscribers. Combining AOL's enormous customer base with Netscape's technology appeared to create a powerful competitor. But the underlying problem remained unchanged: distribution. Most new computers still arrived with Internet Explorer already available. The starting point of the customer's online experience had not changed. Netscape could still improve its browser, it could still innovate, but reaching new users had become dramatically harder. Recognizing that competing alone was no longer enough, Netscape made another important decision. It released the source code for its browser and launched the Mozilla Project. Source code is the human-readable programming code that developers use to build software. By making the browser's source code publicly available, Netscape hoped thousands of independent developers could continue improving it together. Although Netscape Navigator gradually disappeared from the market, the Mozilla Project survived. Years later, that work would lead to a new browser called Firefox. Netscape itself did not survive, but its technology, its ideas, and many of its engineers continued shaping the future of the web long after the company had faded away.
When the browser wars began, the battle appeared to be about one simple question: which browser would people use? By the early 2000s, Microsoft seemed to have answered it. Internet Explorer dominated the market. Netscape was gone, and the company that had once introduced millions of people to the Internet had disappeared as a commercial competitor. From almost every business perspective, Microsoft had won. But technology rarely stands still. As the Internet became central to everyday life, browsers themselves continued evolving. New web standards emerged. Web developers wanted browsers that followed those standards more consistently and adopted new technologies more quickly. The Mozilla Project continued developing after Netscape's decline. In 2004, it released Firefox. Firefox attracted users by focusing on speed, security, and support for modern web standards. It demonstrated that browser competition had not disappeared. A few years later, another company entered the market, Google. In 2008, Google launched Chrome. Unlike Netscape and Microsoft during the original browser wars, Google's business depended on helping people use the web as much as possible. The longer people spent online, the more opportunities Google had to deliver search, advertising, and other internet services. For Google, the browser wasn't the destination, it was the doorway to its broader business. Chrome quickly gained popularity through strong performance, frequent updates, and a simple design. Within a few years, it overtook Internet Explorer to become the world's most widely used browser. The gateway had changed hands once again. Looking back, the browser wars were never really about browsers. They were about distribution. Netscape proved that controlling the browser could shape how millions experienced the Internet. Microsoft proved that controlling distribution could reshape an entire market. And Google later showed that even controlling the browser was only part of a much larger system. In the end, the companies changed, the products changed, the technology changed. But one lesson remained the same. In technology, the best product doesn't always win. The company that controls how people reach that product often shapes the future instead. That lesson began with Netscape. It transformed Microsoft, and it continues influencing the technology industry today.